Welcome to the first episode of Creative Distillation. My name is Jeff York. I'm a professor of entrepreneurship strategy here at the Leeds School of Business, and I'm also the research director for the Deming Center for Entrepreneurship. I'm joined today by Brad Werner, my co-host.
Hi, Jeff. Thank you very much. Jeff and I actually have the pleasure of working together at the Leeds School of Business. I'm faculty director for entrepreneurship right now, but primarily my role is a practitioner role where how do you actually take the academic model and create tools that are effective for our students the day they walk out the door. So I'm really excited to do this with you, Jeff, to talk about current academic entrepreneurial research and to distill it down into how actually does this help a practitioner, someone that's starting a business right now, someone that's in a growth stage, and those different types of business life cycles.
Absolutely, and that's what we're going to try to do, or at least I'm going to try to do. The nexus for this idea came about through conversations Brad and I were having. We've known each other, 4 or 5 years now?
That's correct.
But now Brad has agreed to formally join our faculty, which I'm just thrilled about, full time. And he's going to be working on organizing all of our teaching for all of our entrepreneurship students. That's across MBA, executive education, undergraduate, and there couldn't be a better person for the job, in my humble opinion.
Well, thank you very much.
I think I'm just thrilled he agreed to take this on because Brad's background is not as an academic. I've had him as a guest judge in many of my classes. He's generously given his time. And there's always this trickle of fear that comes into the student team's eyes as they see him hear about things ranging from small-scale commercial aviation to a restaurant concept to a new app to a bakery. And Brad's like, oh yeah, I've been involved in starting one of those. I've also started one of those. And here's why I've done this. He literally has done almost everything that I've ever exposed him to. He had some hand in it. So I think that you bring a great wealth of experience to our students.
Thanks.
I really appreciate that. I, on the other hand, did work before I became an academic. Not to imply that academics don't work, but I worked in the real world. I did some work at a technology startup incubator at one of the national laboratories. Also did a lot of work during the dot-com boom with many failed ventures that I'm really proud of that don't exist anymore. And also worked at a major financial services company doing partnerships before I decided, this is just too hard. I'd rather write papers than actually do this stuff. So I went back, did my PhD at the University of Virginia, came here to the University of Colorado. I've been here about 10 years now. And my role as the research director for the Deming Center is to figure out how to support entrepreneurship research here at the Leeds School at CU. We do that across campus, not just at the Leeds School. So we're involved in partnerships with the law school, with sociology, with the music school, but also to try to make that research interesting and useful to students. And that's what led to this idea for a podcast. Brad and I were continuously having conversations where I tried to explain to him what we folks that write these papers are doing and why it might be of value to someone other than other academics.
That's right.
And we thought, well, let's see. That could be an interesting way for us to do something different and talk about that with each other podcast. And so we started to think about, well, that's a good foundation, I think. But what else do we both enjoy? There's many things we both are interested in.
That's right.
And one turned out to be we both have a love of Colorado's boom in beverages.
That's right. Well, and Jeff, just the benefit of being in Boulder, Colorado, with the startup scene generally, but more specifically in the spirits and in the beer industry is really, really incredible. We're fortunate enough, yes, to be able to do this at a really, really cool distillery, but we're also fortunate enough to have Rawley with us, who is here. Actually, Riley's walking up right now, who's a co-founder of the business.
Yeah, and we are here at DV8. That's a D, a V, and an 8, right, Rawley?
That's correct.
DV8 Spirits. We plan to do this podcast pretty much from a different location, featuring a different beverage. It won't always be alcoholic. I was supposed to mention that. It just happens that, the name of the podcast, of course, playing on Joseph Schumpeter's famous idea of creative destruction, creative distillation, because we're trying to creatively distill these ideas down into useful tidbits. And Brad will tell me if I'm successful in that. Probably won't be, but I'll try.
And truthfully, Jeff, looking at some of these academic papers, you do need a vodka or a bourbon in front of you.
So we thought we'd start the podcast off, and we also have a plethora of cold brewed coffee companies in Boulder, as well as kombucha. I know several kombucha companies. But anyway, we're not here to talk about them. We're here to talk about DV8. And you were saying your most popular spirit is a vodka, Rawley.
That is correct. It's our flagship product. The thing that kind of separates us in the industry is we're 100% rice-based spirits here over at 49th and Pearl in Boulder. And as we're sitting here tasting, I'm just going to kind of walk these gentlemen through the tasting.
Awesome.
So because it is 100% rice-based, it's going to be a little bit more similar to a sake, the Japanese-influenced spirits.
I like it
you
already.
Smell it, you're going to get a little more of that bubble gum, that banana, a little bit of anise. It's a little more viscous. So the reasoning why behind rice is you're going to get a lot more of these profiles through. As opposed,
Can you explain viscous?
Viscous, yes, is just the consistency of the liquid itself. So it's a little bit more like almost like a simple syrup. It has a thicker quality on the palate. So it coats your palate as opposed to water, which just goes down really quick and easy. It has more of a residual effect. It has legs, quote unquote.
Yeah, I was going to say, I could see legs coming up on the side of the glass like you would with a really nice scotch or something
exactly, or a wine. You liken it to those two different things. So as you taste it, you'll be able to get a little more activity on the nose, so it's not a neutral vodka; it's an active vodka.
No, I mean I'm already like, okay, so I guess we should talk about our qualifications to do this at all. I'm a certified beer judge, the beer judge certification program.
Oh, there you go. Awesome.
Don't drink a lot of vodka, so I expect fully to not like this since I'm not a vodka drinker.
Excellent.
But already smelling this, I'm like, usually my sense of vodka is I pick it up, I smell it, and I'm like, yeah, that smells like alcohol. Okay, great. Here, exactly so. I'm almost getting like esters, like
Exactly right.
banana, maybe peach.
Yep.
Okay.
A little more of that stone fruit. And the idea behind this vodka is we wanted to make it more enjoyable and a little more active. So when you mix it in things, you're just going to make a vodka tonic and you won't really notice it. But when you drink it neat by itself, it has character as opposed to just trying to take everything out. We want to leave some stuff in.
Would you classify this more as a sipping vodka then versus a mix?
I would, yeah. So I drink it neat. I drink it rocks. I drink it martini. I'll put it in mixed drinks, of course, as well. But traditionally, I like the flavor of alcohol when it's made well.
Yeah,
great.
Well, and having been 16 degrees the last few days. And
That's right.
2 feet of snow in Boulder is the perfect beverage.
No, this is perfect.
Let's try it.
Apropos.
Yeah, cheers, guys.
Thank you so much for hosting us, Rawley.
my pleasure.
Yeah,
This is
really,
wonderful.
we really appreciate it. And
this is lovely.
the vodka tastes fabulous.
Oh my goodness, that is smooth.
Yes.
I'm a vodka
Smooth,
drinker
a little bit of
myself.
character. Oh, good.
Wow.
I am not a professional. I used to be a professional, so now I would say I've moved back down. I've moved back down to the semi-pro leagues.
Semi-pro
but,
league.
Sure.
Holy
anyway,
cow.
That's what I like to liken myself as well.
Yeah, right.
That is unbelievable. It has actual flavor to it.
It does.
That's pleasant.
Yeah,
So,
that's
I mean,
the idea.
I've never had anything like this, Jeff.
I've never
actually.
had vodka.
Thank you.
And I mean, I had a friend who was an exchange student to Russia, and he brought all this vodka back and was telling me how it was all different, and how we had to. You guys know this thing where you if you don't have anything to chase your shot with in Russia, you smell the other person's scalp.
I've never heard of that.
Sure, that's a new one for me.
He could have just. I could be totally disseminating disinformation. Hugh, if you're out there and hearing this, then
Well, now I'm
congratulations.
going to start applying that to my customers when they come.
Right.
in.
Yeah.
A free shot if.
Yeah, if you like smell, that's the chaser. You smell the scalp, but usually it's like, but even that, I mean, like that was okay. I was like, yeah, I guess it tastes like vodka. This actually is really nice.
Really good.
you.
Hey, so Rawley, if someone wanted to try this, how would they actually track you down and get a bottle?
Absolutely. You can look us up on the internet. Deviantspirits.com is the website, but I would recommend going to Hazel's here locally in Boulder and all the big liquor stores throughout Colorado, but primarily Hazel's is where we do a lot of business, and ask any of the reps for DV8 vodka, and they'll
Great.
get right to it.
Great. Well, it's totally worth a try. And if you get a chance, stop into the distillery. Really cool space, too. So
Yeah.
congrats.
Wonderful.
What
Thank
is
you.
the address of where we are?
And we are at 2480 49th Street, Unit E's and Edward here in Boulder, Colorado.
And you say you're making a bourbon now too, as well.
We are making a bourbon as well. We're just releasing 3 new products over the last few weeks, so we're just in a huge growth phase right now.
That's fantastic.
Congrats. Great.
And then, go ahead.
Oh, so when I was thinking, and Rawley and I were talking before we started the podcast today, and Rawley, in the entrepreneurship world, you're unique because you were able to start your business purely through bootstrapping.
Correct.
Do you mind talking about that for a minute or so?
Totally, yeah, absolutely. So when we were starting the business, we knew it's something we wanted to do, but we were very reticent to give away equity because obviously at the onset of a business, giving away equity, what's the sense in that unless you 100% have to, right? So I was a server at the Buff over here, the restaurant over here, just working my butt off 5:30 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, and then coming here and working here all night. And that was about 1.5 years, 2 years of that. And the benefit of it for us was just, one, it's that sweat equity that I think is really important. You know, you pour your heart into something and you're going to treat it better.
Yeah,
you know, throw
absolutely.
cash at something, you're going to have a little more of a removed perspective of it.
Sure.
So that's half of it. And the other half of it for us is just like, you know, save that equity. We're serious about doing this in the long run. And for us, you know, the bootstrap was the only way that really made sense to us. And also, I think it's a really good way to prove ourselves too. We now have a couple investors who have really come in, and everyone loves seeing that we've put our heart and soul, everything, all of our cash.
Skin in the game is huge.
Yeah.
Skin in the game is huge. And it also just shows a lot about how who we are as people, that we're able to take nothing and turn it into something.
Can you just speak to maybe your largest or your biggest entrepreneurial challenge at getting the business growing?
Yeah. Gosh, I would say time, energy, resources, you know. For us, the biggest leap was, I think, the misconception of what our market was going to be, right? You know, you do endless market research and then you actually open your business. You know, nothing starts until day one. You open your doors.
And then that's all wrong.
That's exactly. And then that's really day one. So for us, it was, okay, we're just going to sell alcohol. But what really we've become is more of an event space and a safe space here in Boulder, Colorado. So we throw a lot of dance parties. We do a lot of LGBTQ fundraising, that sort of thing. Awesome. So we're more of like, our mission statement is now radical self-acceptance for self and others. So what we're really actually in the business of promoting is self-acceptance, live who you are, be your best self, all that sort of thing. Awesome. But through the lens of, you know, like we have glow parties where people paint themselves up with paint and, you know, wear scantily clad outfits, or they'll come in and, you know, be newly out in the queer community, and that's who we want to support.
It's great. So you've tapped into a whole nother community that was sort of looking for more of a home, and you're providing that.
And we are that as well. You know, we are our community, and we represent that demographic, and that's who we want to be, and that's really what the business has become. And we're so grateful that we get to have an opportunity to affect people's lives.
Well, personally, I think that the community is grateful to have entrepreneurs like you, and Jeff and I talk about this a lot as well, on how entrepreneurship can actually effectuate social change, and I think that is really important, and I think that you are a testament to that happening right now.
We're definitely trying to do it as much as we can, and we find that, you know, the more we lean into that aspect of the business, the more successful we become, as opposed to leaning into our concepts of what we want to be. Right.
Yeah. We always talk about this with students a lot, actually, because they always come up with opportunities. I would call them great opportunities for Google. Right. It's like, yeah, that'd be great. And if you did it, then Google could take it away like that, right?
Exactly.
Why not think about who you actually are? And I don't mean like, you know, the courses you took. Like, what is your identity? What do you care deeply about? And then think about how can you align the business with that, or create a new business from that. And that tends to be, I mean, and the research actually shows, Brad, that folks that do that, that's what expert entrepreneurs do. People, there's studies showing that people who have founded multiple successful businesses are people who start with who they are and who they know and build out from that, rather than the opportunity that's sitting out there on the horizon.
Yes. Authenticity, and that's what we found what people respond to in our business is people are like, oh, this is true for you. This is, you actually live this.
Right.
And then they buy into your brand.
Well, and you have a great product.
Well, thank
Which
you.
also
that
helps.
Right. Well, bottom line, it doesn't work without the great product, but it doesn't work also if you're not authentic.
Right.
Which is important. And I actually think that being authentic then leads into self-awareness and those other types of things, which is really, really important as an entrepreneur. Those are foundational tools that you need to understand before you go anywhere.
Well, and it's so true of like so many of the industries here in Boulder too. Like, you know, I mean, we're talking about craft brewing and craft spirits, as well as, well, we're going to be talking a little bit about the organic foods industry today, as well as rural entrepreneurship. This sense of authenticity is what allows you to differentiate sometimes. So,
totally agree.
Awesome. Maybe we can get you in the class to come talk about this.
Whatever you guys need. This has been a real pleasure. Thank you.
It's wonderful. Thank you. This is great. Really appreciate it.
I'll be listening.
So that was awesome. And I honestly, I mean, I'm not saying this because these folks are being nice enough to host us here. I'm saying it because I genuinely enjoyed my drink of vodka that we had. And I don't think I've ever said that in my entire life, even when I was too young to even be drinking vodka. In fact, I know I didn't enjoy it then because,
No, it was great.
It's really good. And we got a bottle. Brad and I are both going to buy a bottle because we both like bourbon a lot, even more than vodka. This is their DV8 whiskey. Awesome label. You can see bringing in sort of the Colorado deer elk feel here. Really like the branding on this too. It's really clean, modern, distinctive.
It's beautiful.
I think it's cool. So we're just gonna leave this up here. I don't know if we're gonna get to open it. Maybe we will later. Let's see. Once I start talking about academic papers, maybe Brad will open it. Won't be able to stop him. So the idea here was. We were having this conversation about academic papers, and then Brad was just kind of like, yeah, I know these things exist. I have no idea why, what you guys do, who would read this stuff, and why it would matter. I got to admit, I've thought the same thing myself as someone who writes it. But I did think that this would be a good opportunity, rather than us just having sort of a broad-ranging discussion about the nature of academia and that kind of thing. Let's look at some papers. Every month, academic journals crank out a whole bunch of papers and publish them. Then people like me read the ones we find interesting. And so I was looking at the papers I chose. I don't know how many we'll get through. We're new to this.
Here's the other thing, Jeff, that I'd like to just bring to the forefront is that you're also an entrepreneur. So I wouldn't claim that title. But you are.
Well, that's very kind.
You have a filter. You can relate to what's going on in the academic world, but you also can relate to the practical tools that are needed out in the field.
Sure.
And so I think that your filter, bringing these papers to light, is actually really, really an important part of this process.
Well, I hope so. We'll see. I mean, I think it's one of our goals for this was how do we communicate the value of research more broadly to our stakeholders, because it's interesting being in an entrepreneurship center in a university like CU at the Leeds School of Business. A lot of our stakeholders are not academics.
Correct.
In fact, most of our stakeholders, certainly in the community, are not academics. That's not to say we don't have relationships and sponsor research conferences and bring guest speakers. In fact, we're doing that this Friday. We care a great deal about research, and it's very important to us. But, there's an awful lot of people who care about what we do and are very passionate about that we also want to explain why we care about these things. So with no further ado, I don't know how many papers we'll get through. We have 3. Brad, you did not read these by my instruction.
Correct.
I wanted to save, I think Brad sleeps okay at night, so I didn't want to, make him have any more of a sleep cure. But I've chose 3 papers, and we'll see if we make it through all of them. The first one I wanted to look at, I love this title, by the way, Urban Farmers and Cowboy Coders, Reimagining Rural Venturing in the 21st Century. And the title is, I think, pretty evocative. And the other reason I chose this, first of all, this is a forthcoming paper. It's in the Academy of Management Perspectives. And Brad, just stop me anytime with any questions like, what the hell is the Academy of Management
Perspectives? I can't even get beyond the freaking title. That title had to keep someone up a couple nights.
That's where the podcast went off the rails and it never recovered. So it's interesting. And again, we're going to try to stay on the papers, but again, this is supposed to be a broad discussion.
Yeah. Well, so let's stop there, though, because
if we look at these titles, it's interesting. If we look at the 3 papers we have, right?
Yeah.
There's a colon in every title. It's always something evocative or hopefully evocative, then followed by a colon and something about what the paper's actually about.
That's right.
So we'll see that pattern emerge again. So again, it's very interesting. It's a very, very codified and clear format to these things, the way they're done.
Okay.
These papers are a little funky, actually, that we're looking at this week.
So for me, it's always, let's cut to the chase. How can this help me?
Sure. Well, okay. Well, we're not going to get there just yet.
No, I know.
Anyway, but we'll try. So first of all, I also wanted to do this paper because it is in press at the Academy of Management Perspectives. And the last reason I wanted to do this paper is that the first author, Richard A. Hunt, Ric Hunt, as we know him here at the CU Leeds School of Business, is an alumni of our program.
Nice.
Really interesting guy. Absolutely a very seasoned and successful entrepreneur who entered into academia as sort of his second career. And it's cool to see someone who really does have the gravitas and experience now writing, and Ric has been very successful in publishing in very good journals. Along with his co-authors on this one, David M. Townsend, also of Virginia Polytech Institute, Stefan Korsgaard, who's at the University of Southern Denmark, and Alexis Nar. This paper is about reviewing and then discussing future directions for research on rural entrepreneurship, which actually is a fourth reason I wanted to do it. Because Brad has been very involved in our Deming Center efforts to go out into rural Colorado and work in communities to educate folks on entrepreneurship and help them out. All volunteer work, I might add.
Yeah, well, I think that rural outreach is really, really important for not only us at the university, but people that live in rural states. There's been a great migration to cities, and how can we actually give the smaller communities tools to create businesses there that people want to stay and live that great lifestyle, which they're so fortunate to be able to.
Absolutely, and this paper talks a lot about that. So what's interesting is the basic gist of the front end of the paper is we know that's necessary. We know that's necessary in the United States. We know there's a huge divide politically, socioculturally, increasingly economically between urban and rural citizens. Yet, and in the entrepreneurship realm, we know things like exactly what you just said, Brad. We need to, as educators, especially we're in a state of Colorado, I mean, we have a huge, the state is really divided. It could be easily split in half. The Front Range is urban, seems like a big city, including Boulder and Fort Collins, and we're very much, there's a Whole Foods on every block here in Boulder or something that looks like it. And then we have a huge expanse of the rural part of the state, which
30 miles away,
which I know you go out to quite a bit for recreation, as do I. So we spend a lot of time out there and realize, they don't always think as fondly as we would hope of the University of Colorado.
And if you even look at it at a broader picture, it's like we live in two different countries.
Yes, absolutely.
And how do we bring that together?
Yeah.
Once again, I believe that entrepreneurship can create social change,
right?
And I think that this is a good lead into that as well.
Absolutely. And so, interestingly, back to your question, how do you figure out what is the problem you want to do this research on? So Ric and his co-authors here have said the problem is there's research on rural entrepreneurship, but it's in all these different fields. It's happening in economics. It's happening in sociology. It's happening in geography. It's not happening very much in the management literature. In fact, I think they have less than 12 papers published in what we would consider a top management journal are on rural entrepreneurship, and less than 1% with that title. Far less than 1% is the exact wording of this. So this is not a topic that's gaining traction in the management literature, and so they think about why. And their why is the way that we in academia often think about what we should study is what they call the gap approach. We look for a gap in the literature, preferably something related to theory, that we can then write a paper about because it hasn't been written yet. And this is something that doesn't always really work that well. As an editor, I see this all the time. People have said, well, nobody has studied this phenomenon. And a good editor and a good reviewer's response is like, maybe that's because it doesn't matter. And also, it leads to very much an incremental approach. And when you're trying to break ground, so we just established, in the paper they established, rural entrepreneurship is not studied very often. So when you're trying to establish and talk about something that hasn't been studied very often, it's very hard to find a gap in that topic because no one's talking about it.
Interesting.
So they're saying that's one of the reasons this hasn't been studied. This is the problem. Our approach is usually to find these gaps, and because people aren't even talking about rural entrepreneurship, it doesn't matter. Second criteria, we try to find things that have generalizability. In other words, they're not dependent on the context. We could generalize them to all of entrepreneurship. So we take our friends here at DV8, and we say, it doesn't matter that they're here in Boulder. Like, we want to find insights about them that we apply anywhere. And what they're arguing is, when you do that, you remove the reason for studying rural entrepreneurship, because the context is what really matters here. That's what might provide these entrepreneurs some kind of advantage. It's them being embedded in these unique, localized, often traditional contexts where they can know their network, where they can find need to create something new. That's what's important. So there's a reason they don't study that. And then they talk about this idea of dichotomy. And this goes back to pragmatist philosophers like John Dewey. It's an American tradition of thought of taking things and saying, rather than it's important to have a distinction, that we're going to dichotomize them. And we're going to say they are separate and do not cross. And they talk about the dichotomy in urban versus rural entrepreneurship. which we all know doesn't make any sense, because if you think about a rural entrepreneur, of course they're going to have some interaction. I mean, they're not going to just only sell in their community because their customer base is
right. But I have to tell you that after speaking to hundreds of rural entrepreneurs or potential entrepreneurs, they feel left out.
Yes.
They actually feel alienated, and they don't know what to do.
Right.
And hopefully this paper can shed some light on some practical things that these folks can take advantage of.
Yeah, so the practical prescriptions in this paper are more about what we can do from a research perspective to try to help advance research in rural entrepreneurship, so we would actually have an answer to that question, because I don't think we do. And actually, I love the way this paper ends. They say, if I can just flip to it very quickly, the specific circumstances related to rural entrepreneurship are poignant, colorful, and illustrative of key steps the field must take to correct its course. By correct its course, I mean to actually study this issue. The question now becomes, how will we respond? Does management's approach to rural entrepreneurship suggest that we are ready or remiss? And I think they're trying to strongly, again, it's a perspective that we're pretty remiss. They do have some practical things that I think are interesting. So if we look at the back of it, he's got this table here. And they talk about, the research tells us that one thing we do know about rural entrepreneurs, they tend to have a sparser network.
Now, does that take, though, an academic to figure that out, or a guy that could just drive
Well, a
into
guy
a
could
town?
tell you that, but then the question becomes, does that sparse network actually help them, or does it hurt them? Now, we could argue, of course, we think about resource. Think about it, right? The bigger my network, the better off I am, right?
Correct.
Okay. Is that necessarily true?
Right.
I mean,
but
what if I just have a huge network of sort of very peripheral kind of contacts?
But in
or if I have a
reality,
deep network?
let's talk about maybe there's two entrepreneurs or people willing to admit that they're entrepreneurs in
Sure.
these towns.
Right,
And you
because
may be
even that,
talking
right, yeah.
thousands, right?
Yeah.
But I'm talking there needs to be some sort of critical mass.
Right.
And maybe beyond the critical mass, I don't know. That's not a point for me even to get into argue. But I'd love to know what is that critical mass for people that are out in the country right now. And my advice, without reading the paper, is in that situation, the bigger the network, the better, the higher chances of success that you'll have.
Right.
Because there's people that, in a sense, that you can rely on that fill in needs that you may not have, and vice versa, right?
Yeah. They actually talk a lot about that in the paper. They talk about this idea that, like, look, you have to let go of this idea that somehow rural entrepreneurs are isolated from their urban counterparts, or they can't make those connections. We need to understand a lot
Or they don't
more
have
about
internet.
how that happens. Well, okay,
Right.
there's
I mean,
that.
we could talk about infrastructure and all other issues as well.
Right. The other aspect they talk about is example setting in education. So exactly what you guys are doing, and what I hope to become more involved in as we go forward, is figuring out, how do you normalize entrepreneurship as a career path in rural communities where there may not be many successful entrepreneurs?
That's right.
How do you make that something that is not like some weird, strange sounding thing, but more like, farmers are the ultimate entrepreneur in my humble opinion.
I totally agree.
I mean, they struggle with all sorts of things that all entrepreneurs struggle with, but on a much more tangible and day-to-day and frankly difficult basis a lot of the time. So I think those kinds of things are prescriptions that come out here. And then the other aspect that I think is interesting here, they talk about hyper-contextualizing entrepreneurship.
What does that mean exactly?
Okay, so that means rather than saying, we need to go teach these folks in rural communities the things that will work when you are here in Boulder and you're trying to do your tech startup and get into an incubator. I'm not trying to demean these things. These are incredibly valuable things that happen here. But do they really help someone, talk about some of the businesses you've worked with?
Oh, no. I mean,
is that in any way useful to them?
It's not an option.
Right.
It's not an option for geographic reasons, for cash resources, right?
Yeah.
These businesses are being started on shoestrings.
Right.
And it's an amazing testament to the individuals that are doing this. But they would never have access to the types of resources that you're referring to.
Yeah, and so figuring out how do you help people do that more effectively. Now, there are a few papers that are referenced in this study that talk about that. One's a very famous one. Ted Baker's the first author on it, that talks about bricolage, the idea of making do with what's at hand. And they actually were studying rural entrepreneurs and showed they actually were incredibly creative at using their resources. I don't think what this does what this study does is gives you what you want exactly.
No.
It doesn't say, hey, Brad, here's some things. But does it at least maybe give you a way to think about like a different approach to when you go and teach?
Here's what it does for me beyond maybe there aren't a bunch of practical takeaways.
Right.
If you're talking about if this paper helps shine a spotlight on the issue, that's a great thing.
That's what they're trying to do here.
Okay, so
that's absolutely
so then
what their goal
100% I'm behind the mission there.
Yeah.
To me, though, I don't live in the world that I know that this problem exists. The light's already been turned on in my brain.
Yeah.
But if this can bring other people and other really good minds to attacking these problems, all for it.
That's what they're up to here. It's interesting because they're kind of saying, look, you guys, this is a huge aspect, and they're really questioning. I know you have mixed feelings about this quote, but I thought it was great because universities, we sometimes can get caught up in like what's the hot thing. We certainly see our students do that, right?
Sure, and entrepreneurs can too, right?
Yeah.
Shiny ball.
So I know you think this is a little pretentious. I like it though, maybe because I'm a pretentious academic. While there's little doubt that digital forms of entrepreneurship might enjoy higher levels of total factor productivity, the relative prosperity of economies in the global north will not be sustained by armies of social media influencers selling each other fashion tips and travel suggestions.
Yeah, and my response to that is no shit.
Yeah, but when you say that, do your students know that, or do they? I mean,
that's a great question.
That's what I love.
Know.
I mean, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. That the paper implies is like going out and trying to teach people in rural community. Oh well, you know, social media is where it's at. And like, oh, like there's people. And okay, here's something I want to do. You didn't read the paper, right?
Correct.
All right, I'm going to read you 2 vignettes. You tell me where, if I want you to tell me if one is located in rural Colorado or here in Boulder.
Okay.
Squash by Sam is doing a brisk business, fresh from the fields. Sam's large crates of zucchini, pumpkin, butternut, acorn, and delicata sell out in under an hour. Less than 20 feet away, Mountain Song, a local producer of artisanal cheese, also packs up after another successful morning, having sold out 30 pounds of homemade cheese for a bounty of $754. Now, second vignette. Literally and figuratively, 1,000 miles away, Carl Paulson and David Helm break open another case of Red Bull. They have been coding a web application using Ruby on Rails for the past 30 hours, but are still only 2/3 finished with contracted work that must be written, tested, and uploaded before the end of the week. Which one's the urban? Which one's the
I guess the urban one would be the first with the farmer's market.
Ah, you're too smart for me.
And the coders, they can live anywhere, right?
Now, why would you say? Yeah, so that's just it.
Because I've met these people.
Yeah.
And if I hadn't worked out there, I would have gone the other way.
Okay, cool. And that's exactly what these guys are trying to point out in this paper. Is we make some generalizations that these rural business. And by the way, the second one is located in rural Arkansas.
Okay.
The first one was like 2 miles from Brooklyn. So
interesting.
So it's really interesting that they're showing through these vignettes. Now you've actually worked in rural communities, but to me, if you read that, I'll be honest, if I'd read that, I'd be like, oh yeah, that's probably, the coding's probably happening in a big city somewhere.
Sure,
right?
It makes sense.
Probably in Berlin.
It fits into everybody's stereotype.
Yeah, exactly.
About
and that's their thing here. They're talking about this idea of dichotomy. When you create that dichotomy, you close your mind down to what the opportunities are for these rural businesses, and you try to prescribe things that may not make any sense, and vice versa.
Totally
the
agree.
emergent of craft industries, such as the one I think of DV8 as being a craft industry. They're making small batch, really high quality vodka and spirits for a very localized community. Of course, they'll expand. They already are in Hazel's, which is an awesome other local business. But it's this idea that when we think about opportunity, let's not take the context and let that define what may or may not be an opportunity. But let's not also say context doesn't matter.
I agree with that.
It absolutely does.
But let me go one step farther.
Sure.
Is that I think that if you had read those 2 vignettes to a rural community group, that they actually may have gone with the stereotypical thinking.
Yes.
And so they, in a sense, have bought into this stereotype as well. So there is a mindset that needs to slowly be helped change in these rural communities, and the fact that we can do this.
Right. And so to take it back to why academia can be useful, this is a long-running conversation ever since the Age of Enlightenment that Dewey and other pragmatist philosophers and other scholars of what is called American pragmatism have talked about and said, dichotomies, I will misquote Dewey, so forgive me, dichotomies are not only conversation killers, they're thought killers.
Yep. And
so that's what this is illuminating. And hopefully this is useful in that it gets into the hands of those that are trying to teach entrepreneurship in rural areas, like yourself, and they start to think, well, I need to think about this differently. And then they have a whole slew of research questions. Now tell me, they don't have the answers here.
Sure.
But would these research questions be helpful to the extent? How does the interaction of alternative social, cultural, and technological logics in a rural venturing yield novel innovations? And what they mean by that is how do entrepreneurs in a rural community, coming from very different backgrounds and biases than those in an urban community, how does that yield novelty, perhaps?
Yeah.
Do you see that? I don't know. I haven't studied it.
I actually do, but I once again, I think it's this confidence level, and I think that some of the rural entrepreneurs, now I can never paint with a general brush that
sure, of course,
they all think that, but there are a large percentage of them that I've talked to that don't believe in themselves enough that somebody else must be doing this in the big city where they have access to these other resources. Yeah. So why should I even start?
Yeah,
and I think
so
that's a problem.
It's flipping that narrative for them.
Correct.
And saying, you actually are the ones that can come up with something unique.
Correct. Because there could be a bunch of lemmings somewhere else.
Exactly. So what do you think?
Useful? I think it was very useful to me in the fact that if this lens is now shifting to how do we help rural communities, I'm all for it.
Okay.
I do think that there is a lot of verbiage in there, and I do not
sure.
But once again, it's all about the focus, the lens, and how can we provide tools for these folks that really, really need them. And I think this is a start. So I'm good with that.
Okay, cool. Good enough for me then. I will say kudos to Ric and his co-authors. I think getting this in one of the Academy journals, this is an influential journal.
Yep.
This is the journal. This is the kind of piece that people publish. And for me, it made me think about, well, hey, I should go talk to Brad, and maybe we could do a study on how these entrepreneurs do this and how it's different. I mean, you and I are in the classroom with a bunch of urban entrepreneurs. Well, that's why I call people in Boulder. Yep. And then there's an opportunity to go out and study and understand these folks and how they might think differently or how we might help them or how they're the same.
Is it your expectation that this paper actually could start the focus on rural communities?
Yeah, it's because of the thing we talked about at the beginning of our conversation, the gap. Mm-hmm. Now there's something published saying there's a gap. So now when I want to write my paper, I can look for the gap. I can cite Hunt et al. 2020 when this paper comes out and say there's a gap. And they said there's a gap. It's not just me saying there's a gap. Right. And so what this kind of a paper does is it sort of breaks open the space for there to be more research in this. Mm-hmm. For what it's worth, I don't think that's the way great research gets written anyway. Okay. But it does turn the focus and allow more of it to happen. And next time maybe we'll talk about one of these other papers, which I do think one of them really does open up the path to great research.
And and one of our goals here is let's distill this and find some tools that can help people that are listening to our podcast right now.
Yeah.
The other thing I'd like to say is if people have questions or would like to email us, Catherine, who you'll hear from at the end of this, can provide all of the contact information so that hopefully we can answer a few listeners' questions every time we get together.
That would be awesome if people wrote in and we could, especially with harsh criticism. We would love that.
Oh, I'm all about real criticism.
Telling us, Ric, write in. I know you're capable of very harsh criticism, my friend. Write in, tell us how we got it wrong. In fact, I would love to have Ric on the show. I think he'd be great. So awesome.
So we have a lot of things in store though in the upcoming weeks with this. Yeah. I'm really excited to move forward, Jeff. Yeah. And I think that we can actually help stimulate some of the change that we've discussed.
Yeah, I hope so. And our goal with this going forward, perhaps we'll be talking about one paper. We also want to have guests on. Yep. So if you're an academic out there who's published a paper recently about entrepreneurship, anything about entrepreneurship, write to us.
Or if you're a practical entrepreneur like myself, come on and give me a little bit of background.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that would be great. I mean, we would love to have guests on from the Boulder community or further abroad. And what would be really fun, Brad, is if we could, being the clever guys we are, we could outsource and get the author to come talk to a guest entrepreneur. And then we could just sort of, have more wonderful products like DV8 bourbon.
Yeah, thanks. I think we should have a bourbon right now. Thank you very much.
I agree.
That's
awesome.
great.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks for